Good evening, everyone. My name is Darlene Deberry. I'm with the Carolina Small Business Development Fund. And basically, we are a fund that specializes in providing resources for the under-resourced communities. That would be communities of color, women, and low to moderate income individuals.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Daniel. I'm co-founder and managing director of Resilient Ventures. We raised our first fund in 2018 and made 11 investments in early stage companies managed by African Americans. Early stage with revenue companies, so companies that are already at bootstrap for a number of years. We're seeking to make that next stage of growth and development. So I just feel very honored to, in this third season of life, I'm calling it, to sit on the side of getting capital distributed to our community. Geniuses like what we saw up here and what we've seen all night. We made, again, 11 investments over the course of the last 3 years. Check size is about 100 to 150. We did a 250 follow-on to a doctor out of Detroit. Most of our companies have been B2B, but we did also, we shot up, I call it, shot a flare in the sky when we set up our fund by investing in a non-traditional VC investment, that's BU Cafe. So shout out to Dorian Bolden, the BU Cafe, the vision he has to compete with the Starbucks of the world. We saw that vision and gleam in his eye. We said, Dorian, we'll get behind you. And we're excited. We have a couple of cafes opening up in the airport, hopefully next by June. And so that's, again, signaling the Black Wall Street narrative, the resilience. Again, that's not a typical VC type of investment. Other ones have been more tech-enabled in businesses that are B2B. And out of the 11, 7 of them started in Carolina. One moved to Atlanta, so we got 3 founders in Atlanta, 1 in Detroit, Chicago, and the rest of the Carolinas.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Powell. Business banker with M&F Bank. Been with the bank for 4 years, been in banking for about 15. I do commercial lending with M&F, so we do a lot of funding of purchasing of locations, buildings, commercial real estate, a lot of rental properties, practice acquisitions, acquiring other businesses. I know Dorian, he's a good client of ours. I believe we did some funding for a building that he has for BU Cafe. But yeah, a lot of what I do is really just reaching out to the community, just trying to provide access to capital. That's been a big focus of our CEO Jim Seals, to provide more access to capital to minority businesses. We have a lot of partnerships with larger institutions. They brought me in when I first came in to run a partnership with JP Morgan on the investment side. I was with my co-deal Wells Fargo previously, and I had my Series 7 and all that on the investment side. So I came in to run that partnership, which is, the partnership was to generate revenue for minority businesses, and so that's a big part of what I've done the entire time that I've been with M&F, is really to focus on providing capital to minority businesses.
So each one of you come from a kind of a different background as far as traditional lending, VCs, and then community development funds. What do you find is the most troubling thing, or the thing that we need to work on most as a culture when we're going to ask for funding?
Preparedness. I'll say it again, preparedness. So anytime that you start thinking about a business, before you approach a banker, it is imperative that you know what your financial life looks like. And you have to take stock. Taking stock means that you know the run of the house in terms of your bills, you know your debts, you understand what your risk capacity is, meaning that you don't want to risk everything. And just taking time to understand if the venture that you are pursuing is one that will be profitable, if it's something that you want to scale, or if it's really just a hobby that you decided that you want to make investments in. And that's very different. The bank might ask you to put your house up. You have to contend whether or not that's something that you want to do. And then, is there another avenue, such as angel investors, family members, some stocks that you've saved that you might want to tap into self-fund? So I think it's very important to just know the spectrum of in terms of how you plan to make that first seed investment and what your organization will take going forward to be sustainable and even perhaps scalable.
Yeah, 100%. I said before getting on this panel, I pretty much say everything Dr. Deberry said. I'm going to go ahead and give her a shout out. She'll be completing her PhD. I'm sorry for putting all your business in the street like that, but you know, me being an education background as long as I have, I just want to celebrate that. That means a lot to me. But yeah, what you said is all a part of that understanding. And I kind of came into this VC role very non-traditionally. Didn't go to MBA, the MBA route. I worked at Fuqua for 8 years. I've been around a lot of very smart people. I've really paid a lot of close attention to how people, you know, make that next leap, that next step. And oftentimes it is heavily debt laden. We know that about the education system for, you know, going to the MBA program like Fuqua and how much costs associated with that. And with scaling the business, it is all about timing. You know, when you can't go any further, you've expended what resources you've had. We talk about friends and family rounds. Many of us don't have. And part of what motivated us to get into business, even though we're kind of up the line a little bit, we're not right at that stage, but we're kind of there. Acknowledging that many of us don't have that access to capital enough to kind of get that push through the first 2-3 years, knowing that those are the years that most fail, right? If you get past 3 years and you bootstrapped well, and you got to the point where you're able to kind of pay yourself at least, and you know, okay, I can't go any further without needing investor capital at that point. But we pretty much say, go as long as you can without having to take any other money outside of what you're putting in. I was really fascinated by Bill Spoole's story. You should study Bill Spoole's story. If you haven't heard his story, exited his company recently, been very much in the public. He gave a talk a few weeks ago at Private, and it was really fascinating for him to hear how he narrated navigating the growth stages. Ended up, you know, not taking a term sheet when it looked like it would be there, and how that actually was more profitable for him to not have a very large cap table at that point. How much money he was able to keep in the company that pays employees. It's really fascinating, that part for me. The other thing that I've learned, that there are a lot of different capital strategies, and that's something you got to learn by just talking to people, talking to folks much smarter than I am around financing models, right? And part of my celebration of life is being in a space that's so dedicated to education that, I mean, listening and learning. Every entrepreneur's journey is different. I've heard some amazing kind of on the cliff stories, like, man, my marriage is about to fall apart. We put all this stuff out there, the stake of it, and then we hit that mark. And then some, you know, from crowdfunding to, again, traditional banking routes, revenue shares, the safe industries. Sorry, I'm using my acronyms. I'm assuming everybody kind of know what they are. Kind of just ask. But it's about the literacy financially, and timing, knowing where your needs are, and now we're ready to go out and ask them. And when you go out and ask, they'll know if that you've understood that, and you've done the work behind that, and you're prepared to make that ask, and that request, and can do those kind of forecasting models that make investors say, hey, this person has done that hard homework, and now they're ready.
Well, echo some of what they said. You know, preparedness is definitely a big part of it. I think the cultural myths that are in the Black community around lending. I run into so many people who they want to use their own funds because they don't want to owe anybody. They want to do it on their own, and what I have to tell them is that it's you put yourself in a hole now, because a lot of part of lending is having liquidity. So if you don't have any liquidity and then you come to me for a loan after you spent all your liquid assets on materials or whatever, and now you're trying to get a loan from me, I can't do it because you don't have the liquidity to qualify. And so I think that's a big part of some of the things that I run into when we're talking about Black-owned businesses. Those myths, the myths about business credit. That's really a myth. When people say I want to get a loan to build credit for my business, it's not really credit for your business, because you have to be the guarantor. And a lot of times they jack their own credit up, their personal credit up beforehand, and now they're trying to develop credit for the business as an alternative, and that's not really a thing, because whenever we do loans, the guarantor has to be strong. And if your personal credit is already messed up, then you're not going to be a strong enough guarantor. And business credit is kind of something where it's more about the institution that you're banking with. So if you get a loan with M&F, a small loan with M&F, and you pay for 12 months on time, no issues, you're building a relationship with the bank to show that you are capable of paying. And that's a different thing from business credit, from what people think. So you're building that relationship, so the next time you need some resources, then yeah, we'll look at that relationship and say they paid this on time and they have a good rapport with us. But you still have to be that strong guarantor. So the personal credit is really more important than anything, when we're talking about credit in general. That business credit thing that I hear people say so much of, it's not as important. That's just a relationship, really. And so being the guarantor of a business, as long as you're not a nonprofit, nonprofits are the only ones who can get away with getting a loan without a guarantor. So taking care of your personal credit is very important, and having some liquidity, not spending that liquidity up front and then trying to get a loan on the back end. Keep that liquidity so that you can get that loan. And I always tell a lot, when I speak with most of my business customers, I tell them, these white-owned businesses, they never spend their own money. They use other people's money to grow. And that's what we have to get to, where we're not afraid of credit.
At what stage would you say you guys as a company typically invest in? Either pre-seed revenue, more specifically to the tech industry, do you have to have some revenue generated? Do you have to have customers? Do you have to have liquidity? What exactly would a company need, a tech company specifically need, in order to possibly get an investment on?
So from our perspective, it has to be a developed idea that can go to market. Basically, if you're in a concept development phase, then it's not really considered a revenue generating company. And so that's kind of the rub, right? Because it's a startup, but it hasn't really started. So because you're the person guaranteeing the loan, it really goes into the strength of who you are and what you bring to the table as an individual, your expertise, and even your financial positioning. For us, we can fund a startup, but that includes having a well thought out business plan, and I mean well thought out with financial projections, and not just straight line cash flow, saying you're gonna make, X amount of dollars as soon as you open your door. The reality of that is not truthful. So it's really understanding what the market is that you're entering into, from the perspective of how you're going to enter in, what your value proposition is understanding your own, break-even analysis and how you plan to become profitable What the banker is really looking for is that you understand your business, because we're going to take a 90% stake in your company, and you're going to have the 10% of the ask that you're asking us to put in terms of the equity position. The other thing that I'll say too is that when it comes to a startup business, there's so much more inherent risk, as Keith said earlier, because the first 3 years of a business is really the critical pieces. It's about how you manage, or how you've managed your money previously. A banker is always going to look at the worst case scenario, even though your projections might be the best case scenario. So just keep that in mind as you prepare your financials, as you look at your position in the market and what you plan to do. If you put financials that are really egregious, meaning that it's just a pie in the sky kind of ideology, and it doesn't look realistic based on what we see in the market, because we will check, then that just kind of gives a negative mark towards your merit. And you want to steer clear of that. You really want to have financials that really represent what the market is doing and what you plan to be able to sell and then make a profit from.
Once again, I echo those, what you just shared. When we created our fund, again, coming at it from non-traditional spaces, my co-founder he's run his own software company for 30 years, and he's intentionally kept it small. It's kind of a cash cow, so he was able to put up some initial capital to get us going. And then as we established our thesis, which you do the research on investors, they have a thesis, and it's generally pretty clear in what they're investing in. For us, part of the playground of this, and I call it that, you can't be playing with folks' money, but we are managing the capital of limited partners who believe in the vision for investing in African American founders who we consider geniuses and just need capital. And part of the way for us to de-risk that was to say, well, because we're learning the business ourselves with VC, we're only going to fund companies that have generated revenue. So essentially, they've identified that, what we call market fit. They've identified that paying customer target, and so that puts us in a little bit less of a riskier position, because we know we're not. We wanted to be open. As I said, we signaled by a cafe shop. We invested in we call a memory care business model. We did a consumer, what we call wearable sports tech model. Graduates out of NC State. And then, our first company we found in Chicago by way of I knew the CTO. He was a former student of mine, and I said, this guy is a winner. The women founders, once we saw what they were bringing to the table and the solution they were bringing in HR tech, which is another space I have a big appetite in because I've worked in HR, that made that very appealing to us. So it was with revenue. We didn't really set a hard marker on that. It didn't have to be $1 million. But we did find a couple companies that were already making $1 million, but still yet not profitable yet, even after being in it for on average about 4 years. But they were getting there, and they had done the right things in terms of building. We saw when we do our due diligence over the course of 2-3 months, on average 2 months, and that felt hard for me too, because we're in the game. We want to write checks and just make it work, but no, we had to dial back. And we see your numbers. Okay, we got some questions here. Do you understand why these questions are? And it was fascinating because we were learning alongside the entrepreneurs, and then we would find out who were the coachable ones and who were willing to kind of take some investor advice. And because we're new to the game, we quite honestly, we weren't sharks. We are managing legitimate, what we call angel, at disposition as angels to be active and to bring support and resources. So we were looking for that disposition as well. So, there's a whole lot of nuance to this work. We have standard kind of screening process that we just stole from our West Coast venture fund. Put the numbers to that, and then we bring VCs in over a 2-hour period. They meet with our investment committee, and then it starts to get real from there, how they've presented themselves as a potential investment for us. After that 2-hour grilling, we bought in about 6 or 7 companies, and that's, hope that gets at some of your questions of how we've kind of approached it.
Everything else is fairly conservative. We don't do a lot of startups. We're looking more at being in business for a couple of years to show some profitability. We are working on we're an SBA provider, so we're working on an SBA Express product, which would provide working capital for startups. The sole purpose would be for startups. I think it's going to depend on the industry. I think tech is one of the industries that we would want to do it for. The hospitality industry is like frowned upon, basically, so we wouldn't do anything in that. But that is something that we are working on and supposed to roll out early this year. I think they pushed it back with all of the rate hikes and everything else that's going on in banking. They decided to roll it back a little bit, but hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have a product to offer to businesses that will be more of a streamlined process through the SBA. And how the SBA works, us being an SBA provider, if you get SBA approval, you really can take that to any SBA provider once you got the approval. So, but if you get the SBA approval, then it goes through us. We have an SBA third party that processes our SBA loans, but that's pretty much the option that we have. Majority of our portfolio is collateralized, whether we come through property. We do accounts receivable backed lines of credit, which is something that a lot of institutions don't do. So if you have some accounts receivable, you can use that as collateral. I'm actually working on one right now to get done for a line of credit for a customer, just to bridge between when they get their receivables in, and they can pay their payroll and things like that. So we have options with we don't technically do the startup aspect of it, but we do have some options that are either coming or that we already have.
Last question before we open up the floor. What do you think, since we talk about not being able to have these individuals that may know the financial side, right, as a culture, and you may not, have a CPA or anything on staff, is there anything specific or any resources that you guys may be able to provide to allow businesses that may not know exactly what their financial landscape may look like, or don't know how to do a business plan, or don't know how to do a pitch deck? What resources are out there to be able to help them out?
So with NF, if you go to our website, nfbonline.com, we actually have a bunch of resources for small businesses to learn about the lending process. We actually, we've gotten a lot of support from a lot of different, unfortunately, when the situation with George Floyd happened, the movement to support minority-owned institutions, financial institutions, really ramped up. And it's been going strong ever since. And I've been in banking 15 years, and I've seen a movement to bank black and all of that, but it usually fizzles out over a short amount of time. So right now, it's still going strong, but we received a lot of resources from a lot of corporate institutions, and that's why I think what's keeping that movement going is once you get corporations involved in a movement, it's usually more sustainable than when it's just individuals. So, like Harvard actually provided some from the Harvard Business School provided us some resources on our website for like free information around lending and the business models and all those things. So on our website is where we have a lot of those tutorials and just free information. There's no charge for it, but it's just resources that have been provided to us from our partnership with Harvard and other institutions.
So at Carolina Small Business, we are a part of the economic development and business ecosystem. So what that allows us to do is to leverage our relationships with the small business and technology development centers at the universities across North Carolina. There's a particular resource if you're thinking about starting a business that the SBTDC has on their website that takes you from A to Z, how to start a business in North Carolina, which is one thing that I usually share with my clients. The Small Business Center, Jonathan was here earlier, Durham Tech definitely has resources. There's also resources at score.org that range from, understanding anything from writing a business plan to doing the financials, all aspects of it, as well as, they have ongoing learning for like marketing and digital assets and different things of that nature. But most of the small business centers, most of the score.org also has mentors. There are individuals that are available to you free of charge, and I need to say that, free of charge. The earlier that you contact them, the better position that you're in terms of initiating that process, because it does get to be a crowded space, but if you are short on money and long on time, it's a perfect time to reach out to someone. The other thing that I will say too is that what we have internally at Carolina Small Business is something called a Digital Learning Academy, and that's like, if you really want to self-study, there's resources there both in English and in Spanish that ranges from, project management, marketing, learning QuickBooks, just resources that you can take your own time to study and get a little bit more equipped to do the task of money management and personnel management, as well as supply chain management if you're in a business that relies on vendor communication. So there's lots of resources, but I think the best thing is just to have a conversation. For us, we take about a 30-minute consultation with new clients. In that time, we're really trying to assess where you are in your entrepreneurial journey, if I can help you in terms of funding, or if you're like close to being loan ready, then I can work with you. If you're a little further away, then I can make a quality referral. But I think the initial contact is really an assessment to see where you are, to determine what resources will work best for you, and to also put you in the best possible position for success.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. Our companies have already either, at minimum, they have a fractional CFO, or someone occupying that role who has expertise and experience. Again, it goes back to kind of your network. You got to ask. Sometimes we've had some folks step up with our fund to, once they learn about the mission of what we're doing, that essentially volunteer helping us value companies, for example. You'll be amazed. I hope you'll be amazed. My heart breaks for folks who are out, kind of don't feel like they can get into network space, and even if, and I'm very self-aware of, it's not always the same for everybody. Like, oh, you just said it to someone, and they were like, oh, can I help at no cost? It doesn't always happen easy like that, but at least you need to know that, yeah, you can maybe get some fractional support to start off. Again, the resources are out there, and I want to salute Brandon and everybody putting this type of program together, because I think we need to see how proximate we are to to our dreams coming true, because it truly is, it is an abundance mindset. It's there. We have lots of gifts and skills and abilities, and amazingly, we've gotten relative wealth into our communities. We know it's much more a long journey ahead of us with respect to that, but you know, Durham and places like this, again, I'm constantly inspired and grateful that when I told somebody I needed something, I needed some help, generally they were like, okay, let's help you get there, and that's why I sit in this role very much enthusiastically tonight.
Open up the floor to any questions. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists. Parliament.
All right, I'm gonna ask a question. Have you guys seen any slowdown in the economy slowing down as well? Have you guys seen any slowdown in terms of startup and people rising for capital, or is this the best time for people to start a business?
Yeah, I mean, again, the world is spun so crazily, right? Depending on when we got into this, when we made our first investment in 2019, February 2019, wrote that first $50,000 check, and we were in Chicago, sitting down at the dinner table with some lawyers and some people in our network, and we were talking about, you know, financing businesses and startup. We were at the Angel Capital Association National Summit, and there was all this buzz and energy about, you know, venture and angel capital. I couldn't appreciate at the time that I was actually sitting at this table, given my journey. But as I've grown up over these 3 years in this space and seeing the questions that come with access to capital, the challenges that come with access to capital, read a lot of books, you know, studied the whole Silicon Valley, you know, Mecca arise and what that looks like on the West Coast. We did a lot of travel, man. Had the pandemic happen. Oh my goodness, I've probably been in all 50 states just trying to understand the footprint and ecosystems and how capital flows, right? Where is investment truly happening? You got major financial centers and things like that. Certainly it's harder to raise capital, harder to raise a fund, certainly harder to raise a second fund with no exits, things like that. So fundraising is always hard, no matter what. You know, clearly people have been very hesitant. We've had major news stories of from Theranos to a bunch of other just tragic realities about the high risk that comes with this work. But it's, you know, and even as you consider, again, SVB Bank, recently the collapse of that and the recoiling. Now there's also policies that affect who can be the accredited investor population, and that there's a potential for that to kind of go way south about who can be an accredited investor. So there's lots of effects out there, and some of them are I call counterintuitive. Like it could be a time to strike hot as an investor because valuations are down on companies, so you got a chance to get, you know, maybe get, you know, on top of some of that as an investor. But you know, entrepreneurs may struggle in that move, right? And we did have, it's interesting, you mentioned about the impact of this wave of like interest in like wealth building, and the disparity of black wealth building. The fact that numbers did go down on investment, venture investment in black funds, you know, from whatever the 2% down to 1.8 or something in the last quarter. But again, that it went down. You know, they say when white America gets a cold, we're dying, right? So the large economic landscape is recoiling, and we're going to feel those effects even more. So it's just fascinating to me. I try to approach it with a degree of living up to our name as resilient. Like, we'll figure it out. We have to. survival is at stake and generations are going to be impacted. So, yeah, great question. I leaned into it pretty hard because I have been emerging in the VC space and very humbled by the struggles that our entrepreneurs face, trying to understand their capital strategies and looking at the very real risk that our economy presents in trying to scale businesses. So.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. If you give them a round of applause. And we would also like to thank our major sponsor, Mr. Eric Powell, over there from M&M Bank. We would not be able to make them happy. Please give them a round of applause, a big round of applause. We appreciate you and everything that you and the bank are trying to do in the tech industry. And we would not have made this event happen without you and the staff at M&M Bank. So let's give them one more round of applause. We really appreciate you. And then Ms. Deberry, give another round of applause, Ms. Deberry. And a great mentor of mine, I have Mr. Keith Dane from Resilient Ventures. And Safari Solutions, can you give her a round of applause? Yeah! Black Blue Culture, a round of applause. And Billionaire's Barbershop, a round of applause. And I would like to call one more gentleman up, got a minute or two, who is a really special individual to me and also the co-founder of xcar.com. He has been a great help to me and a great mentor in my life and has been a great example for me. The co-founder of xcar, Mr. Harold Barnes. Give him a round of applause. Well, thank you. I'd like to thank the DJ over there, Mr. Morris. Round of applause. And y'all have a great night and drive safe.